Tantor Audio presents The Brotherhood, America's Next Great Enemy by Erick Stakelbeck, narrated by John Pruden. I have set watchmen upon your walls, O Jerusalem, who shall never hold their peace day nor night. You that make mention of the Lord, keep not silence. Isaiah chapter 62, verse 6. Prologue. Meet the Brotherhood. The alleged leader of Germany's Muslim Brotherhood punched me. It was actually more of a playful nudge of my right shoulder, something an old friend might do while busting your chops. Yet I had met Ibrahim el-Zayyat only minutes before. You should have asked me for some names, el-Zayyat said as we stood in the lobby of a Cologne hotel. I could have put you in touch with all the right people. I had just informed him that I had contacted a few leading Islamist figures in his home base of Cologne and gotten no response. Hence the nudge and a look of feigned exasperation. How long must I suffer this infidel? In reality, I wasn't too upset at the lack of response from Cologne's Islamists. El-Zayyat was the one I really wanted. He's been called one of the most influential Islamists in Europe and a quintessential new Western Muslim brother. Likewise, the Global Muslim Brotherhood Daily Report, a comprehensive intelligence digest, regularly refers to el-Zayyat as the leader of the Muslim Brotherhood in Germany. Since I was writing a book about the Brotherhood, el-Zayyat seemed a good place to start. But in the run-up to our meeting in late June 2012, I had all but given up on interviewing him. For weeks, I had sent el-Zayyat emails saying I was coming to Germany and would love to get together. His responses were infrequent and non-committal. Finally, on my last night in Germany and after a long day of interview shoots, my cell phone rang as I was heading back to my hotel. To my great surprise, it was Ibrahim el-Zayyat. I can meet you at your hotel in 30 minutes, he said, but I can't stay long. My cameraman and I grabbed a quick bite, set up for the interview shoot, and waited. And waited. Just when we thought el-Zayyat might not show, he came bounding through the hotel's front entrance. Clad in a smart suit and designer eyeglasses and sporting a wavy salt and pepper mane and neatly trimmed beard, el-Zayyat looked more like a European diplomat than a spider in the web of Islamist organizations, as one Germany security official described him. That alleged web has many strands. El-Zayyat, according to Wall Street Journal reporter Ian Johnson, seemed to have either founded or been closely involved with every recently established Muslim Brotherhood-related group in Europe. The list includes the Federation of Islamic Organizations in Europe, FIOE, widely considered the Brotherhood's lobbying arm on the old continent, as well as the World Assembly of Muslim Youth, WAMY, a Saudi-created group for which el-Zayyat acted as European representative. El-Zayyat also served for nearly a decade as head of the Islamic Society of Germany, IGD, an organization with long-time ties to top Brotherhood leaders in Germany and abroad. In short, Ibrahim el-Zayyat is an extremely well-connected mover and shaker who, despite his youth, has been a major player on Europe's Islamist scene for years. Born in Germany in 1968 to an Egyptian Muslim father and a German mother who converted to Islam, el-Zayyat has spent most of his life in Deutschland, but is well-traveled and speaks fluent English. After studying law and economics at German universities, he went on to become a successful businessman and marry a doctor. His wife is the niece of famed Turkish Islamist Necmettin Erbakan. Needless to say, Germany has been very good to el-Zayyat, yet he seemed to have little affinity for his homeland as he spoke to me of Germany's supposed intolerance for its 4.3 million strong Muslim community. From the Muslim community side, it is that you feel not part of the country, he told me as we sat in a small conference room, because many people have the deep understanding that they have done the utmost to be part of Germany, but the society is refusing them. Germany has a lot of parts now which are no longer multicultural but now monocultural, and this is a challenge for everybody. A challenge indeed, particularly for non-Muslims in places like London, Madrid, and Boston who've seen Muslim immigrants unleash deadly terror on their cities in recent years. I visited many of the type of unassimilated monocultural Islamic communities Al-Zayyat describes and have reported on them extensively. From Berlin to Brussels, to suburban Paris, to Dearborn, Michigan, Muslim immigrants are segregating themselves from their host societies and setting up Islamic enclaves that are often no-go zones for non-Muslims, including police. It's hard to see why a committed Islamist like Al-Zayyat would frown on this development. The Muslim Brotherhood's leading global ideologue and spiritual guide, Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi, whom Al-Zayyat praises effusively, is the driving force behind the Brotherhood's state-within-a-state strategy for the West. And Al-Zayyat himself is helping to spearhead the rapid construction of mosques throughout Europe. A Cologne newspaper featured a profile of Al-Zayyat describing him as the chief representative of an organization called European Mosque Construction and Support. In that capacity, Al-Zayyat reportedly maintains more than 600 mosques across Europe and helps with the construction and renovation of countless others. According to the Muslim Brotherhood's own documents, mosques, or Islamic centers, are meant to serve as the beehives of the parallel Muslim societies the Brotherhood envisions in Europe and the United States. Coincidence? When Al-Zayyat's involvement in a mosque project becomes known, locals often protest. His reputation as a Muslim Brotherhood-connected figure precedes him. He is well aware of the baggage he carries in the eyes of non-Muslims and shared a simple, very Brotherhood-esque solution in an interview with the Wall Street Journal's Ian Johnson. If a plan to build a mosque is made public, everyone is against it. Mosques must always be built secretly. If it's not public, you can build any mosque regardless of who's behind it. You just have to keep it secret. This strategy of deception, or takhiyya, has paid big dividends for Al-Zayyat. It has also attracted the attention of German authorities, who have investigated his business dealings over the years, but have yet to indict him on any charges. Although the government scrutiny and ensuing bad press have forced Al-Zayyat to keep a lower public profile, once we began our interview, he settled almost immediately into his familiar role of crafty spokesman for the Islamist cause. The Muslim Brotherhood's Mohammed Morsi had been declared the victor in Egypt's presidential election just hours earlier, and Al-Zayyat was clearly pleased. I think it is a big success for Egypt and for the democratic change process that you have Mohammed Morsi now as president, he crowed. To hear Mohammed Morsi and democratic change uttered in the same sentence now sounds absurd, given Egypt's wholesale descent into Islamist chaos under Morsi's rule. Of course, to those of us who've long warned that the Muslim Brotherhood is a radical anti-American organization that spawned Al-Qaeda and Hamas and actively calls for the destruction of Israel, the idea of Morsi as Cairo's version of Thomas Jefferson has always been not only ludicrous, but downright dangerous. Yet at the time of Morsi's election in 2012, Western media and governments were still enraptured by the so-called Arab Spring. Some still are, despite its disastrous results, and had much invested in the notion of a supposedly moderate, pragmatic Muslim Brotherhood taking the reins in Egypt. Whether Al-Zayyat assumed I was among this sizable pro-Brotherhood camp is unclear. Regardless, he plowed ahead with talking points that would leave the average New York Times or BBC journo positively smitten, as if the playful love tap on the shoulder wouldn't have already done the trick. I believe that for many years we had only a lot of misinformation and misconceptions about the Muslim Brotherhood, Al-Zayyat said. You had information mainly filtered by governments who have been oppressive, and I think that this should be overcome, and I hope that it's overcome. He needn't have worried. Ever since the outbreak of the Egyptian revolution in January 2011, the Obama administration and its mainstream media minions have been hard at work recasting the Brotherhood as, in Al-Zayyat's words, a reform movement that is evolving and worthy of more than $1 billion in American taxpayer aid, even given our massive debt. I think what is special about the Muslim Brotherhood in the end, El-Zayat continued, now clearly hitting his stride, is what you could describe as a thought which is combining Islam with modern life. And this starts with Jamal al-Din al-Ikhwani and Rashid Rida, and it comes to Hassan al-Banna, who had been the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, but who had a completely different stance on things. Al-Ikhwani and Rida were two seminal Islamists who helped inspire al-Banna's stance on things prior to his formation of the Muslim Brotherhood in 1928, a stance that included, as we'll hear shortly, a hatred for the West and Jews and a desire to reestablish the global Islamic Caliphate, with an Egypt ruled by Sharia law as its centerpiece. When I pressed El-Zayat on al-Banna's clear directives for Muslim brothers to wage armed jihad against non-believers, he didn't skip a beat. The concept of jihad, as it has been presented by al-Banna as the big jihad, is the jihad in us, El-Zayat calmly explained. As to fight, against all the bad evil that is within you. This is the real jihad that you have to overcome. The hundreds of millions of men, women, and children who have lost their lives to jihad, as in holy war for Allah, its traditional and primary meaning, over the past 1,400 years would likely beg to differ with El-Zayat's assessment. But the Brotherhood's good friends on the political left, most of whom know not a shred of Islamic history and have never picked up a Quran in their lives, simply nod in mindless agreement. After all, this jihad stuff sounds like it would fit in perfectly at their next yoga class. Polished, eloquent, and charming, El-Zayat would seem the ideal spokesman for the Muslim Brotherhood, or MB, and its agenda in the unsuspecting West. The only hitch is that he steadfastly denies being a member of the group. In 2007, the MB's official English-language website, Ikhwan Web, identified him as a Brotherhood member, but later retracted the claim and published a denial from El-Zayat. Additionally, when a German parliamentarian said that El-Zayat was clearly a functionary of the Brotherhood, he sued her, unsuccessfully. The Egyptian government under Hosni Mubarak also maintained that El-Zayat belonged to the Brotherhood. In 2008, it convicted him in absentia and sentenced him to 10 years in prison on charges of funding the MB in Egypt. The Brotherhood was banned under Mubarak. As you might have suspected, El-Zayat's conviction was thrown out after the Mubarak regime was toppled, and he received an official pardon from Morsi in July 2012. Member or not, El-Zayat plays a unique role in the Muslim Brotherhood's ideological universe. He's forged close connections with top global Brotherhood leaders and clearly shares and promotes the movement's worldview. Still, he, like other MB-connected individuals in the West whom I've interviewed, some of whom you will meet in this book, disavows any sort of formal relationship with the Brotherhood. Doing so has helped these new Western brothers, as Italian terrorist expert Lorenzo Vidino calls them, largely avoid the stigma that the Muslim Brotherhood carries, or used to carry. Indeed, the MB's much-deserved reputation for violence, radicalism, anti-Americanism, and anti-Semitism is rapidly disappearing in the age of Obama. The concept of engagement with the Muslim Brotherhood is no longer only whispered about at D.C. cocktail parties. It has become the official policy of the United States government. We're nearing a point where El-Zayat and his Western cohorts may not even have to bother playing a double game anymore. The Muslim Brotherhood and its affiliates are coming to power throughout the Middle East and North Africa with the full support of Western governments, the Obama administration chief among them. In essence, the Brotherhood, which had moved in the shadows for most of its existence, has suddenly gone mainstream. When an organization's members and non-members become frequent guests at the White House and European Parliament and lead governments that receive billions in Western funding and weaponry, it's safe to say that any stigma that once existed is out the window. As a result, the day is fast approaching in Europe and the United States when allegations of membership in the Muslim Brotherhood will be greeted with a collective shrug of the shoulders by Islamists and Western officials alike. The Muslim Brotherhood, the granddaddy of them all when it comes to modern-day Islamic terrorist groups, is now considered polite company in Western capitals. In the process, it hasn't had to change its core beliefs one iota. America as we know it must still be destroyed. Israel must still be wiped from the face of the earth. The global Islamic superstate, or caliphate, must still be reborn, and Islamic Sharia law must still be imposed upon one and all, whether we want it or not. In other words, the brothers espouse the same platform today that they did upon their founding nearly a century ago, a fact that seems not to bother President Obama and his foreign policy team in the least. "Let me know when your report airs," Ibrahim El-Zayat said as he prepared to depart our interview and move on to yet another appointment. "I look forward to seeing it." The wind was at El-Zayat's back as he bade me farewell and strode off into the warm Cologne night. His side was winning, and he knew it. Chapter 1. Islamist Winter is Coming. The Arab Spring will weaken Al-Qaeda. Of that I am sure. Strike 1. It was June 2012, and I was at the Council of the European Union in Brussels, chatting with one of the EU's top counter-terrorism officials as we prepared to do an interview. He holds a position that is central to securing Europe from a rising tide of jihadist mayhem, much of which stems from its own growing Muslim communities. An important man, for certain, with zero understanding of the Islamist ideology that drives terrorism and animates a large slice of the Muslim world. "The Muslim Brotherhood will work against the terrorists," he continued, offering the standard view of Western bureaucrats, led by the Obama White House, that have doubled as cheerleaders for the MB and its supposed moderate brand of Islamism. Strike 2. As we sat down to begin the interview, our distinguished bureaucrat asked what we would be discussing. "Iran, Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda, and the Muslim Brotherhood," I replied. "Let's just focus on Al-Qaeda," he answered. "I'm not as strong on the others." My cameraman had to stop me from falling out of my chair. This was one of the European Union's top counter-terrorism officials, and he wasn't up to speed on the world's #1 state sponsor of terrorism, Iran, its most lethal terrorist paramilitary organization, Hezbollah, and its #1 purveyor of jihadist ideology, the Brotherhood. Automatic strike 3, and the interview hadn't even started yet. Our European friend's tunnel vision regarding Al-Qaeda is a sickness that is endemic to Western capitals. In focusing the overwhelming bulk of their counterterrorism energies on stopping Al-Qaeda, U.S. and European officials have watched impotently as Iran, Hezbollah, and the Muslim Brotherhood, all three even greater threats than AQ for different reasons, have grown in strength and influence. Incidentally, so has Al-Qaeda. President Obama's disingenuous message to audiences during the 2012 presidential campaign that Al-Qaeda is on its heels, decimated, and on the path to defeat, notwithstanding. He continued to trumpet this false narrative and shamelessly mislead the American people even after Al-Qaeda-linked jihadists rampaged the U.S. consulate in Benghazi on September 11, 2012, killing 4 Americans, and stormed U.S. embassies in Egypt, Tunisia, and Yemen that same week. What President Obama conveniently left out of his campaign stump speech was the fact that Al-Qaeda and its affiliates and allies now cover more geographical ground than they did on 9/11. From its main base in Pakistan's tribal regions, AQ has spread its tentacles into Yemen, Somalia, Sinai, Syria, Nigeria, Libya, Iraq, Europe, and the Sahara Desert region encompassing northern Mali and southern Algeria. At the same time, the terror group's murderous ideology has inspired a wave of homegrown and immigrant jihadists to attack their host countries in the West. Don't worry, though, folks. Osama bin Laden is dead. which means Bush's bogus war on terror is over. We can pack our bags and go home now. That little flare-up in Boston, an isolated incident carried out by two lone wolves who misinterpreted the inherently peaceful teachings of a great religion. Anyway, this violent extremism stuff is distracting our president from much more pressing matters at home, like instituting Obamacare and keeping his promise to fundamentally transform America. While he's busy doing that, Islamists are fundamentally transforming large swaths of the Middle East and North Africa, and we've decided to cast our lot with the most dangerous of them all, the Muslim Brotherhood. The Sharia, then the Sharia, and finally the Sharia. Mohammed Morsi was on a roll. It was May 2012, just prior to his victory in Egypt's historic presidential election, and Morsi was providing an adoring audience of Egyptian Islamists a vision of things to come under his leadership. This nation will enjoy blessing and revival only through the Islamic Sharia, he bellowed. I take an oath before Allah and before you all that regardless of the actual text of the Egyptian constitution, Allah willing, the text will truly reflect the Sharia, as will be agreed upon by the Egyptian people, by the Islamic scholars, and by legal and constitutional experts. Thick-necked, humorless, and podium-pounding, Morsi represents the polar opposite of the dashing and verbose Ibrahim al-Zayyat. The differences extend into the tactical realm as well. Whereas al-Zayyat has always followed the trusted Muslim Brotherhood blueprint of slow, stealthy Islamization, Morsi and his ironically named Freedom and Justice Party have thrown gradualism out the window since taking power in Egypt. The result has been a headlong dive into Sharia madness for the Arab world's most populous and influential country. The Islamic Sharia system that Morsi and the brothers so lustily desire for Egypt, and are well on their way to achieving, means a few things. Women will be oppressed. Christians and other religious minorities will be persecuted. Homosexuals will be executed. Political dissidents will be imprisoned and tortured. The extinction of Israel will become a chief foreign policy goal, and the West, the United States in particular, will be demonized as the eternal enemy of Islam and a tool of the hated Jews. At least 4 of these Sharia harbingers are already occurring with alarming frequency in the new Muslim Brotherhood-dominated Egypt, and things promise to get worse quickly. The implementation of Islamic Sharia law means that freedoms of speech, conscience, religion, and thought, if they existed before, are brutally repressed. For examples, look at Iran, Northern Sudan, and the mini-Islamic Emirate of Gaza, run by the Muslim Brotherhood's Palestinian branch, Hamas. Such was life under the Taliban in Afghanistan as well, and such will be life in Egypt one day, probably soon, unless civil war, economic collapse, and famine tear the country apart first. You can take it to the bank. No interest allowed, since we're staying Sharia compliant. Listen, the Muslim Brothers fought for 84 years to reach power and impose Sharia. Israel's former ambassador to Egypt, Zvi Mazel, told me during an interview in his Jerusalem home in late 2012. Now that they are in power, will they say, okay, now we are going to become modern people. We are going for high tech, and Allah is not important. No, it's impossible. Indeed. During his aforementioned Sharia speech in May 2012, Morsi shared a bit more of his worldview and the kind of modernizing, forward-thinking policy prescriptions he would bring to the office of Egypt's presidency. Mohammed Morsi. In the 1920s, the Egyptians said, "The Constitution is our Quran." They wanted to show that the Constitution is a great thing. But Imam Hassan al-Banna, Allah's mercy upon him, said to them, "No, the Quran is our Constitution." The Quran was and will continue to be our Constitution. The Quran will continue to be our Constitution. The Quran is our Constitution. Crowd. The Quran is our Constitution. Morsi. The Prophet Muhammad is our leader. Crowd. The Prophet Muhammad is our leader. Morsi. Jihad is our path. Crowd. Jihad is our path. Morsi. And death for the sake of Allah is our most lofty aspiration. Crowd. And death for the sake of Allah is our most lofty aspiration. Morsi. Above all, Allah is our goal. Is it any wonder that Egypt's beleaguered Coptic Christians, who not long ago comprised 10% of the country's population, are leaving in ever-growing numbers now that Morsi is in power? Incidentally, Morsi's harangue was neither spontaneous nor original. He simply and intentionally paraphrased the long-time motto of the Muslim Brotherhood. Allah is our objective, the Prophet is our leader, Quran is our law, Jihad is our way, dying in the way of Allah is our highest hope. In other words, total unwavering devotion to imposing fundamentalist Islam by the sword, if necessary, upon the world, with the ghoulish veneration of violent death to boot. The slogan is the same today as it was 85 years ago. And it will be the same 85 years from now. The Brotherhood, unlike the flatlining Western societies it is slowly helping transform from within, does not compromise on its core beliefs. It does not do tweaks or reboots. It's all Allah, Muhammad, the Quran, jihad, and violent martyrdom all the time. Take it or leave it, infidels. Americans, meet your new ally in the Middle East. What Mohammed Morsi did in his May 2012 speech, one which was utterly ignored by Western media, was the same thing that a long succession of Brotherhood leaders have done before him. He simply laid down the gauntlet and reiterated the Brotherhood's long-standing bedrock principles to Egyptians and to the world. All who are shocked by Morsi's subsequent moves as president have no one to blame but themselves. They weren't listening. If they were, they would have known that the Brotherhood's official rallying cry has remained the same ever since its founding by a fervently Islamist schoolteacher named Hassan al-Banna in the Egyptian port city of Ismailia in 1928. Al-Banna, who was heavily influenced by the extremist Wahhabi Islam of Saudi Arabia, was disgusted by British colonial rule and the non-Muslim influence it brought to Egypt. He blamed the country's downtrodden state of affairs on what he perceived as its drift away from Islam. Al-Banna's slogan, "Islam is the answer," spread like wildfire, and the Brotherhood, also known as the Ikhwan, or the Society of the Muslim Brothers, went from 7 members at its founding to as many as 2 million by the late 1940s. Indeed, Al-Banna's anti-Western message of Muslim superiority, which also included generous doses of jihad incitement and anti-Semitism, resonated to such a degree that by 1948, just 20 years after its founding, the Ikhwan had become arguably the most powerful political and cultural force in all of Egypt. Today, although Egypt remains its main power base, Al-Banna's movement knows no national boundaries. The Brotherhood's relentless focus on dawah, or proselytization, has helped it make major inroads on 6 continents. One of its main settlement techniques has been its control of mosques, including across the United States and Europe. These frequently mammoth, multi-million-dollar Islamic centers run by Brotherhood acolytes are built largely with funds supplied by wealthy donors in the Persian Gulf region, particularly from Saudi Arabia and Qatar. Thanks to this disciplined dawah and settlement strategy, the Muslim Brotherhood is now present in at least 80 countries, and according to one longtime Brotherhood leader, boasts some 100 million adherents worldwide. The vast majority are not official members, but all have one thing in common: tireless, fanatical devotion to the Brotherhood's radical ideology. That's bad news for the United States, not to mention Europe, Israel, and any secular-minded Muslim or religious minority who has the misfortune of living under Ikhwan rule. The seeds for the Ikhwan's meteoric global rise were planted by Al-Banna. Above all, he was devastated by the collapse of the Islamic Caliphate, which ended with the disbandment of the Turkish-led Ottoman Empire in 1924, The caliphate joined the Muslim world, or Ummah, into one unified Islamic state governed by Sharia law and pitted against the West. Al-Banna's
Sample complete. Ready to continue?